So I'll describe the demo here. So we've got our protected site. It's in San Jose in Equinix Data Center. I've got a small VMware environment there. It's up and running. Within that environment, I've got the virtual machines we'll be recovering to, I should say, an Azure VMware solution, private cloud in the Sweden central region. Now, for the purposes of saving time in the demo, everything's already installed, right? So we've got an existing environment, the virtual machines are there, but we'll demonstrate both the near zero RTO option and the on-demand. So I've got virtual machines organized into 3 domains. Domain 1 has 10 virtual machines, about a 500 gig data set. Those 10 virtual machines are right now set up in this continuous rehydration mode. So they're being replicated to an Azure storage account in Sweden. And these are being rehydrated into the local vSAN on that AVS private cloud. Domain number 2 is another set of 10 virtual machines, about the same amount of data. Similar situation here. We've got this continuous rehydration, so this near zero RTO option in play. So they're being replicated into the storage account, but now instead of being rehydrated into the vSAN, they're being rehydrated into an Azure NetApp Files backed data store. Now the third domain, a smaller domain, so it doesn't take 6 hours. 3 virtual machines, about a 60 gig data set there. Now these, when we get into the demo, you'll see they don't even exist yet. The domain hasn't been registered. It's not even known to the JetStream deployment in Sweden. During the demo, I'll import the domain and we'll start the rehydration, or we'll start the failover, I should say. So for right now, they're just being replicated into that storage account. And then during the demo, we'll complete the failovers of domain 1 and 2. So we'll just do that last sync and bring up the virtual machines. And then for domain 3, we'll do the whole thing, and eventually it'll be restored onto an ANF data store there. All right, so now I'm going to switch screens and bring up my browser. Here is our VMware environment in San Jose. So it's a small, we get a couple of nodes in the cluster. We've got JetStream deployed. So this is our UI. There's 3 domains here. So for domain 1, 10 virtual machines, and a mixture of Linux and Windows. They're all protected. They're all recoverable. For our purposes, that means they've been replicated to the object store, and they're available for rehydration. I've got a couple of workloads running in here. So for Linux machines, I'm running FIO just to generate some traffic. And on a couple of Windows machines, I'm running JetStress, just so somebody can have an Exchange server flashback for a minute, again, just to provide workload for us as we see here. So domain 1, 10 machines, domain 2, as I described, about 10 machines, and domain 3. So while they're running here, we take a look at some statistics. So we're looking at this is incoming and outgoing data rate for that environment. So what I see here, and this is going to refresh pretty often, so I'll just describe what we've got. So at the point in time I've got here, I've got foreground traffic. So for our purposes, foreground, those are new writes in the virtual machine going from the guest OS down toward the storage system. So in this case, we see there's about 47 megabytes per second. Then we've got background writes. So background, this is data we're reading from an existing virtual disk and replicating out. When we perform an initial sync, it's mostly background writes, and then it changes to be mostly foreground. So in the statistics here, the next item down there says incoming. So that's the combination of the foreground and the background. So that's essentially the entire data stream coming from the IO filter to the DRVA. So in this case, you'll see it's about 47 megabytes per second. So then outgoing, so this is what is going to come from the DRVA to the object store. It's 49 megabytes per second. But You see replicated. So in this case, you'll see the replicated says about 13 megabytes per second. The difference between the outgoing and the replicated is compression. So the DRVAs are configured with compression on all the time. So that compression allows us to make economical use of the object storage, as well as to reduce the amount of bandwidth required for the replication. So we can see that they're active more than anything here. So that's domain 1. Domain 2 is similar. Right, so they're up, they're running. So now let me show you the recovery side. So we've got our AVS private cloud in Sweden. So we can see it's up, it's running. Actually, probably better if I just showed you the environment here. So we've got our Sweden Central, we've got our VMware cluster, and we've got virtual machines. JetStream's already been installed. Again, it was installed using those run commands. So we can see here domain 1 and domain 2. So these have already been imported. And then we've already started that failover. So we can see for domain 1, we've got about 585 gigs of data that's been processed. And what we have remaining is 813 megabytes. So when I go to complete this failover, I've already rehydrated that almost 600 gigs. And what we have left is just this 800 megs. For domain 2, something similar, about 760 gigs has been processed. There's about 64 megs left. Domain 3 isn't here at all, right? It only exists in San Jose and on the object store. So let's create a disaster. For the sake of time, I'm gonna just take our replication appliances here. I've got one DRVA set up per domain just for simplicity in this demo, and I'm just going to power them off. Actually, we'll go to VMs. We'll just power them off. So when those DRVAs are down, we no longer have that replication link out to the object store. We're no longer updating this. For the purposes of us, the sites are severed.
One would say air
now.
No, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. Inside joke, inside joke.
So now we could see if I waited long enough, you'd see we'll eventually get errors here. It's going to tell us that it's no longer able to keep up with what's there. It'll tell us the link is down.
Do you have any direct integration in the vCenter console so we could like manage the objects from that UI, or is it all have to be done in JetStream?
So what do you mean by manage the objects?
As far as like, like right click, and do you have like JetStream extensions inside vCenter?
The configuration we would do with our UI. It could be done with the UI or it could be done with the APIs, but not a per VM level inside vCenter.
Okay, yep, no problem.
All right, so on the recovery site here, I've got a browser that doesn't want to cooperate. Just make this one full size. So on the recovery site, I've got the protected domains. I also have a storage site configured. This is our Azure storage account we're using. If I scan the domains, so this is going out, reading what's there. It finds our container object, and there's our 3 domains. So domain 1 and 2 are already here. Domain 3, I'm going to go ahead and import. And I just showed you that in the protected domain list before, we only had 1 and 2. Now we have domain 3 as well. And so it knows there's 3 virtual machines. They're imported. If I go back to one of these domains I can go to the settings, and we can take a look at the failover runbook. So you'll see I've got a runbook group here. If we want to take a look at the settings, I'll just show you what we got. So this is where I would configure that pre-failover script and the post-failover script. Next, these are the virtual machines that are included in this. And from here, I can change the boot order. I can configure it to retain the MAC address. So in the case where you're using something where the MAC address matters, whether that's licensing, hopefully that's not the case anymore, or you've got some kind of IP address management where, you know, there's a reservation at the recovery site based on the MAC address. We'll keep those MAC addresses here. They'll be the same when they're brought over. We can change the boot sequence. So for example, if I want number 12 to start before number 11, I'll just click the up arrow here, and now you'll see that 12 is ahead of 11 in the list. I can specify a boot delay. So if I want to add a boot delay, I just add it here. Again, the idea with the boot delay is we want to have time for the machine to come up before we start the next. I can also change things like CPU and memory, because we're actually, you know, we're going to start a new virtual machine on the other side. We can change that configuration. We can bring it up with the new configuration. You asked about the per VM script that's here, and then also we could configure that static IP address. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of this. So that was the runbooks. So for domain 1 and 2, we already saw that we had started the failover. So let's go ahead and complete that failover. So I'm going to go to failover. And these are my complete options here. So here's the original VM network that was configured on the protected side. I've already selected a recovery side network here. I have the options here for planned failover and forced failover. I described planned failover. It doesn't apply here because I killed the protected side. That's done with coordination. So I'm going to go ahead and complete the failover. Click OK. And so we'll see, I'll show you the current steps. If I click on this, you'll see that we had already prepared rehydration. We had already started recovering the data. Now we're at the step here, we're going to take that ownership. So I see it says 6:25 p.m. in Sweden. So we would expect that ownership is going to take us about 4 or 5 minutes. So now we're taking ownership. Let's go on to domain 2. And I'm going to do the same thing. So to failover. Now in this case, I hadn't already selected a network. Again, I started this continuous rehydration. I don't necessarily have to have even the networking in place. Now I'll go ahead and select a network. So this is one of our existing networks in that environment in Sweden. And I'll go ahead and complete the failover. And we'll see that's also going to switch to taking ownership. Now for domain 3, all we know is that it's here. So let's start the failover. And so it knows the name, it knows the amount of protected data, it knows the storage site. That was all written out, or read, I should say, out of the object store. Click next. And now I'm specifying where to put these virtual machines. So I'm going to pick my SDDC data center in Sweden. I'm going to pick the cluster. I'm going to put these into a particular folder. So let's find demo 3. And then I'll pick the data store. So any storage that's presented as a data store is a valid target for us. I'm going to go ahead and put these on that ANF volume 2. And then I'll next. Now the network mapping. So I'm going to put this on this 131 network. And now I'm asked about networking for that ROC VA, our recovery appliance. So I'll tell it which networks to use for that management. So these appliances, as you see this, we've split up some of the functions based on their use. Basic idea here is if you needed to, put it a different way. If you've got multiple network adapters on these ES6 hosts, we might be able to take advantage of some additional network throughput by splitting up and having this appliance with multiple network interfaces. They don't have to be separate. But for this purpose, I put them all on one, but that capability is there. And then next, I have to choose a DR virtual appliance. This is for that resumption of protection. So I'll choose this one. Each DR virtual appliance has a specific replication log storage. So we'll select that and tell it what size for the log. And then we'll go ahead and start this failover. Now, in this case, we're going to see that we're going to start with taking domain ownership, and then we'll start to actually prepare the rehydration. So let's go back to domain 1 and see where we are. So we've actually changed ownership, and we've actually into that final synchronization phase. So now we're only 3 minutes in. What we're now doing is we're going to clean up the recovery VMs. If you look here in the other side, I described there's that recovery appliance, and then these with the RVM, these are little placeholder VMs. And what we'll see here is they'll start to go away. And then the actual VMs that we're restoring will be registered and then powered on. So that's domain 1. Domain 2 also is in this mode where it's finished the rehydration and it's starting to clean up and bring up the machines. So for domain 1, we can actually see the virtual machines are starting to populate. And for domain 3, we're still waiting for ownership. So at this point, everything is pretty much, it's a physics problem, right? We're waiting for the data to finish.
So looking at this is really cool, and I know you've got APIs and all that, but do you have customers that are actually taking this like, let me define my VMware infrastructure for production as code, but also at the same time have my failover in this scenario that has all these mappings mapped out already as code as well? Does that make sense where I'm going with that?
Yeah.
Or more importantly, if I spend the time to build this and Eric is, often helping on some other pieces and we don't stay in touch, is there a way to export all of these correlations and things across the different environments back out as a way to define it as code and then store that and make sure that I'm in a consistent state?
So we do have customers that are doing that.
Okay.
We have our own automation toolkit.
Yep.
So that automation toolkit can be used to, we can connect to the primary side vCenter. We can tell it which virtual machines we're interested in protecting. It'll go gather their configuration and statistical information about them. And then we'll give you a recommendation. If all things are equal, we can actually give you a recommendation for how to group them together in the domain. We're selfish. We're doing it to try to.
Sure. You want control over it.
We want to make sure that we sort of even out the IOPS for the virtual machines that are being protected, so that they're sort of similar. Now you can choose that grouping any way you want, but if you just left it completely alone, we'll group them together based on just a sort of a profile.
Okay.
Then it'll give you a resource recommendation. So if you want to do it manually, you'll get a report. It'll tell you, okay, here's what we recommend. This number of DRVAs, this number of protected domains, and you could use that manually. Or we can export that as a plan file. Okay. And we have with our automation toolkit a way to automate the execution of these plans. So there's a start protection plan, there's a failover plan, there's a continuous failover plan. So they can be exported and then used. Or this all can be done just with the API. So we have customers doing it with a combination of both. We have an automation set that's specific to us that does most of what you've got. Now, we don't try to orchestrate the deployment of the recovery environment.
Okay.
We would
be
an add-on to that.
Yeah. Now your plan exports, are they as code or are they seen as like binaries? Thinking about like storing those plans in source control, do I have a way to, obviously there's a lot of different angles you could take this, but does that make sense?
Yeah.
Are they actually as code or are they viewed as a binary in source control. So every time I dumped it, it would always show that it's a change versus, hey, this changed and I can't track it.
So
We can
the-
sample it.
So the plan files are in a YAML format.
Okay, they're good enough.
So we can see that for domain 1, we've completed. So all the virtual machines are now running in Sweden. If I go to domain number 2, we'll see that domain 2 is also completed. So those machines are all running in Sweden. And if I go to domain 3, we're at the very last step where we're applying that policy. These machines will be, we're executing the runbook now. So we'll see the machines will start to come up in order. So we're essentially through the demo here. So we have other questions?
For the runbook recovery plan, it looks like a very easy walkthrough of the ordering. The one I was asked, when you set like boot order, what's the trigger for the next one to occur? Is it just VM heartbeats? Is it OS heartbeats? Are there ways you can customize the level of recovery? And second question, how do you deal with a vast amount of machines that look like they got to come on at the same time and the limit? So I think it's what, 8 at a time that you can boot in VMware. At the moment, they still cap you at how many you can launch at any one point in time. So there's neat idiosyncrasies around that, lighting everything up for recovery.
So the runbook order, as far as powering on the virtual machines, we're waiting for vCenter to report back that the machine's running.
Okay, cool. So wait for the powered on, basically the flag to hit back from vCenter.
Yeah. And as far as the number of them concurrently, we're not doing anything to try to manipulate that configuration of concurrent operations in vCenter. So it would still be limited by what's configured there.
Cool. Yeah. So we would have to plan if you had 20 machines.
I suppose that could be done with one of those scripts, but we're not doing anything explicitly to try to